Alrighty, take probably 10 now that I've re-recorded these, but let's do the introducing first. So this is for a draft league in the National Competitive Pokemon League, a Facebook group, or it's called the NCPL. It's private, so you don't have to worry about it. There's 20 competitors in there right now. There's 6 seasons deep in draft. They're very helpful. They're really active, so go on and check that out if you guys haven't, or if you guys don't know about it. But I'm gonna do these, rate my teams in the draft order. So first pick in the draft order was Matt M. There's 2 Matts, so I need to clarify that. So Matt drafted Toxapex, Gyarados, Metagross, Magneton, Golurk, Blissey, Alola Ninetales, Fortress, Crocodile, Talonflame, and Ninjask. Okay. So, looking at his team, before I get into the rating system, and how that, you know what, I'll explain the rating system before I start. The rating system is based on 5 attributes that I find very core components to building a good draft team. Obviously, there's way more that goes into building a team, like weaknesses, move pools, cores, synergy, things like that. But I feel like these 5 attributes are basic, they're broad, they, you know, they're simple enough for me to do an explanation that isn't, you know, 2 hours long. So each attribute is rated out of 10, lowest being 0, 10 being highest, and a maximum score of 50. So the other thing that I want to mention is I don't think any team in this draft is bad. I think there is good and really good. I don't think there's bad though. I think everybody drafted really strong teams and had a pretty clear goal in mind in what they were drafting. So looking at his team, he drafted pretty bulky team, but with that bulk, I mean, he has 4 rock weaknesses. Yep, 4 rock weaknesses. 2 of them are ×4 rock. He has 3 earthquake weaknesses, and what's the other one? Sorry, I wrote this down somewhere. Oh, that was the other one. 1, 2, 3 fighting weaknesses. 4 fighting weaknesses. So he's got a lot of weaknesses spread out through his draft. Despite it being bulky, I think it's a little bit clunky as well. You know, he's got to do a lot of raw switching if he's not getting volt switches with Magneton and Fortress. These things become really exploitable when you have a team like this. The opponent figures out, you know, okay, well, he's gonna have volt switch on this guy, I can run Assault Vest, or and you know, and tank that, and then, you know, hit something super effectively. Or you know, if they have a ground immunity, they can switch it in, or they can, you know, call you out and double switch out. So it's clunky and exploitable. But some of the good things about Matt's draft is that having Blissey and Fortress and Gyarados and Alola Ninetales, I want to say is if you don't break screens and he lets you let him set up screens, well, he's now able to get in Gyarados for free because Gyarados can run Intimidate and even mitigate the damage even more. And then it's got a pretty good move pool, Dragon Dance, and Moxie if you want to run it like that. So that's really good about his team. And then you got Blissey and Fortress. So one thing I'll mention about those two is you're probably going to see those two switching between each other more often than any other Pokemon, because they cover each other, you know, pretty well. I mean, Fortress is weak to fire and Blissey can cover that pretty easily, and I think Fortress can cover fighting. Let me check. You know, I always get confused about what cancels what out when they get double typings, because sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So yeah, he is not weak to fighting, so he can cover that fighting weakness just fine. With his, you know, super high defense at 416, I think. So, you know, if you let your check for either Fortress or Blissey go down, I mean, you're gonna have a real fun time trying to get rid of those two Pokemon. What's gonna happen is they're either gonna toxic you or just chip you down between the two of them. So if you're versing Matt, you really got to make sure that you have the correct checks and you keep them alive when versing him. Otherwise, you know, he can run over you with just his defensive Pokemon. That's how strong those defensive draft picks are. And, you know, another note to make is I didn't mention his talk specs. And the reason I didn't mention talk specs is probably because you're going to see Blissey switching out for Fortress more often than talk specs, because Blissey can then wish or you know, heal bell or whatever the case is. But talk specs is good on its own. It you know, Regenerator is just absolutely incredible. It's got insane bulk, it never freaking dies, it's got recover, it's got toxic spikes, it's got scald. So a really fantastic Pokemon. And then he's got Steel Trapper and Magneton, and he's got, you know, a really bulky attacker in Metagross who's great typing as well. So he cleaned up his draft a little bit by drafting a Crocodile who could lead, run Stealth Rocks, can Pursuit, and Brick Break himself. So if somebody's utilizing that Hail and setting up screens on their side as well, he can Brick Break those away. So let's get into it though. I don't want to spend, you know, a crazy amount of time on these. I just want them to be short, sweet, and fun. So we'll start with offense. I rated a 6.5. As I kind of said in my introduction there, his team is clunky and his offense is a little bit clunkier. So with three offensive options, in you know, you could count Ninetales as an offensive one too if you want. That would be 4 offensive options that are weak to Stealth Rocks, 2 of them getting 50% by Stealth Rocks. So on top of that, having you know, just weak to rock in general, you got things like Aggron, you know, Lycanroc D, you know, anything with a snap rock move or just rocks in general is going to be a big problem for Matt's offense. It's really going to slow him down. As I said, he's forced into making raw switches and reliable and having screens up to make those raw switches work. So that leads me to rate it a 6.5. You could argue it to be more because, you know, Magneton's got Steel Trapping and, you know, Intimidate or Moxie or Dragonades, but he's got Volt Switch from Fortress and Magneton, which can get Pokemon in slowly for free. But like I said, that becomes very predictable and exploitable. So he's got to watch out for that. And I think that's a big issue to his offense, is that it's predictable and exploitable. So he's got to find a way to become tricky, you know, predict well, make sure he gets those screens up every single game. Because if he doesn't, I feel like his offense really suffers from not having screens up. So, you know, he does have good offensive options though. I'm just saying that they don't really cohesively work together, I would say. You know, Magneton's not going to Volt Switch into Metagross more times than not. He's not going to Volt Switch into Talonflame, probably. I mean, yes, you could for the Earthquakes, but you know, you suffer from them predicting and doing something else. You have Gyarados with Dragon Dance, Intimidate, Moxie. I mean, he can set up on his own with Intimidate, but again, he's relying on rocks not being up and screens being available. So you then have Talonflame, who again relying on rocks not being up. Talonflame is not as reliant with screens if rocks aren't up, since, you know, his typing outside of being ×4 to rock is not bad. He's got bulk up, he's got a very high speed tier, he's got Gale Wings, so he can come in and clean up or revenge kill as long as his health stays full. You have Ninjask to you know, speed boost, clean up His attack is not the greatest, but his speed tier is very, very high. So if he just needs to clean up the chip down Pokemon, that's totally okay. Again, ×4 to rock though. You then have Golurk, I want to mention. Although I find this a weird pick, it got a new move in Poltergeist. It has ground stab, which is really great. It's a fighting immunity, which he needed because he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fighting weaknesses. So it allows him to get in a free wall breaker, which is great. His team needed that sort of offense. And then the last two is Crocodile, Metagross. I mean, Crocodile pretty standard. You're not going to see him run too differently. Probably Stealth Rock, Crunch, Pursuit, Earthquake. You know, maybe the odd move here and there to cover something like Rock Tomb or something like that. But Metagross, I would say you can run a little bit more tricky. He can Rock Polish, he can be a Choice Bander, he can be a Choice Scarfer. His stats are quite bulky. He can run Assault Vest. He's probably Matt's most flexible Pokemon on his team, in my opinion, and the hardest one to prepare for, I'd say. So as long as Matt keeps Metagross tricky and his opponent's guessing on that, I think he could be a really, really big asset to his team. So next is defense. I rated a 7.5. Despite him having a lot of bulk, they share a lot of weaknesses and they require a lot of raw switching. Ninetales needing to set up Aurora Veil, but weak to rocks, sharing that weakness with Gyarados and Talonflame and Ninjask. And, having to raw switch out from Ninetales into something and then switch back out, because he's probably not going to be switching into an offensive option unless he can, properly tank it and not take too much damage. Wish Passing, again, he requires raw switching. And this is going to slow down his defense and make him predictable and exploitable. So his defense also suffers from rocks. The amount of raw switching Matt's going to have to do if rocks are up, it's really, really going to whittle down his team. And then he's going to, get pressured and he's going to make these predictable, exploitable switches. So, defensively, he's got good defensive Pokemon and he can switch really well between them, but the problem is the switching. It's raw outside of Volt Switch from Fortress. So as long as he keeps the rocks up and the chip down, or the rocks off and the chip down, I think his defense will flourish. So one thing I want to mention is, as we saw, his defensive Pokemon in Toxapex, Fortress, and Blissey are very, very susceptible to neutral stab moves, like we saw against Chris. Earthquake, basically broke Blissey, and he shares that ability to Earthquake Pokemon. He can, Fortress tanks the Earthquake, but Matt had a Toxapex in that game, and that Toxapex really didn't like the Earthquake either. So I feel like Matt's defensive team is really dependent on who he brings and then how he utilizes them. The Blissey and the Toxapex don't work that well together just because of that exact thing that I just mentioned, the Earthquake. Toxapex not really liking Earthquake and Blissey not able to tank it. So that would lead him needing to bring Fortress to almost every single matchup with the Blissey and the Toxapex. So it's a 7.5 still, despite the things that I said about it. As I said earlier, if you let your Blissey check go down, or your Fortress check go down, or your Toxapex check go down, have freaking fun, man. You're gonna have to deal with Blissey killing your team, or Fortress killing your team, or Toxapex toxicking your team and killing them via chip damage and status damage. So you're really not gonna like that when that happens. But yeah, 7.5, it's still a very, very great defense. Really make sure that you have your checks in mind and know that you need to keep them alive to break his team down. So next up is speed, 6.5. Pretty easy to point out here. He's got two Pokemon that are really fast, both ×4 to rocks. The other two Pokemon that I would mention in the speed tier, I'm not going to mention Ninetales since it's generally not used offensively and really all you're doing is setting up screens. Its speed tier is 346, 348, I think, though. Timid, So it's not bad, and if you need to clean up something and set up screens at the same time, you can absolutely do that with Ninetales. The last two would be Gyarados and Crocodile. Pretty mediocre speed tier. Crocodile being 311 Jolly Max, and Gyarados even less than that. So with things like Zeraora, Dragapult, and Keldeo roaming around, I feel like those speed stats are pretty mediocre. With that said, it's still 6.5, just above average, because he's got things like Choice Scarf available to him, and he's got Gale Wings, he's got Speed Boost, and Dragon Dance on Gyarados. So that's what I feel about his speed. Hazards is Matt's absolute best attribute. He's got hazards on half of his team. He's got Toxic Spikes on Toxapex, Stealth Rock on Metagross, Stealth Rock on Crocodile, Spikes and Toxic Spikes on Fortress. I don't think Fortress gets Stealth Rock. Oh yeah, Fortress gets Stealth Rock too. He's got Stealth Rock on Blissey. So I mean, all those options to have Stealth Rock, it really frees him up to run other moves that are more suitable to him. Like in his game that he just had, he was able to run Earthquake on Fortress. Even if that wasn't the case because he was able to run Stealth Rock on somebody else, my point is that if he runs Stealth Rock on Blissey, that frees up a move slot for Crocodile, Fortress, frees up a slot for Toxapex too, if Toxapex just wants to run Toxic instead of Toxic Spikes, since there's rocks already up, and vice versa. If Fortress runs Stealth Rocks, that frees up Blissey's move slot to either run something like Toxic or Thunder Wave, or just Wish, Protect, Heal Bell, Seismic Toss or something like that, right? So it's a 10. I mean, it's what really is going to win him games, getting those hazards up and then keeping his defensive Pokemon alive and chipping down people by forcing them to switch or make predictions. So last I will get into is Momentum. I rated it a 1. So as I mentioned several times, his team is very clunky, requires a lot of raw switching. Outside of Volt Switch from Fortress and Magneton, you're probably not going to see U-turn on Ninjask or Talonflame, because I think Talonflame gets it. I'm not 100% on that. He doesn't have Teleport. He doesn't have any other U-turners or Volt Switchers. So if anything, I feel like he could really patch that up by getting rid of Talonflame and Ninjask, in my opinion, since he's got options to deal with Grass type or Steel types. He doesn't need Talonflame, and he's got options to deal with Fighting type as well with Metagross. So the one is because the raw switching is a problem. He requires screens to do that raw switching. It forces him to slow down the game to a pace that even he won't like, and become exploitable. His momentum is just it's too slow to rate anything more than a 1. So he can build momentum with that slow Volt Switch on Fortress, but at the same time, that the opponent switches out on the Pokemon that you switch in, well, now you're back to raw switching again, right? And chipping down your own team. So if anything, I feel like if Matt could pick up a couple more U-turners with the trade of Ninjask and Talonflame, I think that would really benefit his team. As for versing Matt, I feel like keeping rocks on his side of the field is really detrimental to your win. That and U-turning and getting optimal predictions is going to help you win the game. So as I said, it's exploitable, so make sure you exploit those weaknesses, and watch out, because he might exploit you doing those exploitable switches, right? So overall, I rated his team a 31.5. The only thing that's really bringing it down from a good rating is that 1 on Momentum, which I said could be cleaned up if you got rid of Talonflame and Ninjask. If you guys think that's wrong, let me know, but I really think he does need a little bit of U-turning and momentum in that sense. It would also help him with the defog problem, since his hazards, he's good at hazard setting, but he's got 1 rapid spinner and defog in Talonflame, I think. And although he doesn't want to defog away hazards on the opponent's side, I think it's still very useful, because Matt's team doesn't appreciate hazards on his side either, so if he needs to get them off the field, I feel like he should at least have that fallback, so he doesn't have to rely so heavily on Fortress. But yeah, I'm sorry if these are cringy, guys. All I want is these to be fun, and I'll get better at doing these, and I just wanted something that everybody could visually represent their team and see and look at the team stat. I thought that would be kind of cool for everybody. So I'm no Pokemon guru or amazing Pokemon player. I've played in a lot of drafts, but I'm not like number one or anything like that. So I hope you guys enjoy these. I hope you stick around for the other ones. Let me know if you guys want to see something different, like game analysis or matchup analysis or commentating, because I'd really appreciate it if you guys let me know what you guys think. So yeah, up next is going to be Chris, and thanks for watching. Thanks, guys. All right, back for round 2, or in my case, round 25, since I've recorded these a million times now because I keep making mistakes or missing something or anything like that. But first off, this is for the NCPL, or National Competitive Pokemon League. It's a draft league on Facebook. Check it out. It's private, so you don't got to worry about anybody seeing if you're worried about that. So secondly, I want to mention I'm sorry if you hear 1,000 uhs or me taking deep breaths. Excuse me for losing my voice, but it's not as easy to talk to yourself for hours and hours at a time. So I hope later on I can maybe do these with somebody else and get another set of eyes on things that I miss or things that I don't see. So getting into it, next on the draft, rate my team would be Chris, or Christopher, or what I call him as a friend, Gambler. Now, Gambler drafted Landorus, Reuniclus, Incineroar, Ambipom, Claydol, Volcanion, Mega Pidgeot, Umbreon, Frostlass, Sock, Weezing, and Alcremie. Sorry, I need a drink here. Now, looking at Chris's team right away, we spot Landorus. So his core is already at minimum 5, just because Landorus, he can defog, he can U-turn, he can stealth rock, he can sweep, he can set up, he can choice scarf, choice band. Landorus can really do it all. So phenomenal draft pick by him. Pairing him with Incineroar was a great double Intimidate core. Although they share a weakness with water, it is covered by Volcanion. So you can see right away, Chris has a pretty clear plan of what he's drafting and what he needs. Incineroar and Landorus create that Intimidate core with U-turn chip and fake out chip. So he's going to be able to chip down Pokemon to either have Sock clean, or Volcanion clean, or Mega Pidgeot clean, or Ambipom clean up. Then you got Reuniclus. So let's talk a freaking minute about this Pokemon. If you don't have a dark type, or you don't have a dark ghost type, I would really recommend drafting one before you verse Chris. Reuniclus has the ability to sweep a team with no help. Doesn't require screens. It doesn't require rocks. So with that said, if you have a dark type, you can counter that stored power or psychic from it. Reuniclus is able to set up with acid armor, set up with calm mind, and then stored power and recover if it's taken too much damage. So that dark type, or that dark ghost type, is gonna really help you resist that stored power or focus blast if you have a ghost type, dark ghost type. It also has magic guard, so it can't be toxic, status, it can't be get chipped by stealth rock or spikes. The best bet to verse Reuniclus is make sure you have a Whirlwinder, a Roar, a Taunter, or really heavy duty hitting Dark Stab or Ghost Stab. But even then, I mean, Reuniclus gets Calm Mind and it gets Acid Armor, has a ton of HP, so absolutely fabulous draft pick for Chris. He drafted it pretty early. which is no surprise. This Pokemon is devastating to verse. So next up, we got Ambipom. Kind of does the same thing as Landorus, and Incineroar just builds up that chip damage. You got Pidgeot with that Hurricane No Guard. Flying Stab, which is really useful against, the fighting Pokemon that are in our draft. Not just fighting the grass type, like Amoonguss, Tangrowth, Conkeldurr, Keldeo. What else you got? Venusaur, things like that, right? So you have Umbreon, you have Sock. Sock's pretty self-explanatory, has Mold Breaker, he's an attacker. Umbreon's kind of that sneaky backbone he has that's going to help Landorus and Incineroar stay healthy, make sure they can continue to keep up that Intimidate, Core, and U-turn, so they can chip down the opponent's Pokemon. So getting into it, his offense, I rated an 8. His offense is pretty overwhelming with, you could say these Pokemon go in defense as well, which they do, but they kind of do both because they have quite high attack stats as well. They get in really free, they get free damage. So those Pokemon are Landorus, Incineroar, Ambipom, Volcanion, Mega Pidgeot, Sock, and Reuniclus. So the Landorus, Incineroar, and Ambipom are just going to build up so much damage. I'm pretty solid on saying that Landorus and Incineroar are probably going to build up the most damage for Chris in the season, just because they can continue to switch between each other and basically make a vortex if you don't have a water stab. But even then, Volcanion gets a free switch in because water absorb, and then he chips you down even more. So the offense just is looking absolutely fantastic. He's got U-turn on Pidgeot as well. He's got Reuniclus, who can set up in the back or can run a regenerator build, or just a tanky stally build, right? With I don't know if Reuniclus learns Toxic. I do want to check on that really quick. Reuniclus, Smogon. Do you learn Toxic? Yes, Reuniclus learns Toxic, Thunder Wave. It also learns Trick Room, so you can set it up like that as well. So Reuniclus can kind of be run in tricky ways, which is going to be really useful for Chris. So people aren't always countering his setup build. And then you have Sock sitting in the back with potentially a Choice Band or Choice Scarf ready to clean up or wall break. So his move pool is quite good on his team, between Ambipom, Volcanion, Mega Pidgeot, and Sock. He covers quite a bit of types, so definitely deserves the 8. Next we have defense. As I said, these Pokemon can be put into offense as well, which is Landorus and Incineroar. I've seen a lot of Incineroar sets that run max attack, max HP, and then rely on their bulk or wish passing and parting shotting, U-turning, and chipping down the opponent like that. I think that works perfectly for what Chris's team does, because he can chip down with Incineroar and then switch out to Landorus with U-turn or parting shot and get that double intimidate off, or double the parting shot and intimidate. Then you have Claydol. I mean, Claydol's kind of a tough one to mention because Claydol is everything Landorus does except worse, which would be Landorus sets up Defog, Rocks, U-turn, and Claydol just can set up rocks and screens and has Scorching Sand. They both have Levitate immunity, so although Claydol can be hit by Mold Breaker, I don't see Chris bringing Landorus and Claydol though. So if he brings Claydol, it's very matchup specific, or he has a very matchup specific plan that utilizes Claydol. And the last one I'm going to mention is Umbreon. And the reason it's going to be the last one is because I feel like Wheezing, Alcremie, and Frostless, they fall under this category that's not really defense. Those three I feel like could be changed out for something that could help Chris's team better. Maybe except the Frostlass, because the rapid spin blocking and the fighting immunity is still kind of useful. And the Destiny Bond to some extent, so... but anyways, Umbreon. What I was saying before is it's kind of a sneaky backbone because that Pokemon is going to be keeping Landorus and Incineroar alive by Wish Passing and Heal Belling. And by doing that, it's allowing Chris to rack up damage for Volcanion, Ambipom, or Sock to eventually clean up, or Reuniclus just to go in and set up, right? So, you know, the ability that Umbreon has to keep Chris's team alive and the momentum going on his team is really, really useful to Chris. So I think his defense definitely deserves the 8. Next is speed. I rated a 7. Pretty mediocre speed. I mean, he's got 2 Pokemon that are borderlining that 400 mark, but aside from those 2 Pokemon, which are Ambipom and Mega Pidgeot, he's got pretty mediocre speed tiers in Volcanion, Landorus, and Sock. Frostless, you could say, as well, with 339 Timid, but it's generally used to, you know, set up spikes and debond. I can only really see it being kept in case there's like a dragon or a solo grass type or something like that, and he needs to get rid of it. But even then, he's got, you know, he's got ways to beat down dragons, and he's got other ways to beat down grass Pokemon with Incineroar and Volcanion, right? So the speed tier is good. It's worth the 7, but it's definitely not higher than 7. I mean, only having 2 Pokemon with speed tiers that are above 330 or 350, I think is one of Chris's not worse. The worst isn't the word I want to use. One of Chris's attributes that aren't as good. So not necessarily needed. I mean, he's got Reuniclus who can just set up and sweep, and Choice Scarf with Sock, but you understand what I mean. So next we have Hazards. This is Chris's worst attribute, but you know, it's justified, and the reason that it's justified is because it's a 6.5, and the reason that it is because he only has Landorus to set up rocks. I mean, he has Claydol and he has Frostless to set up spikes, but the thing is he's probably not bringing Claydol and Landorus to the same fight, and Landorus being his only reliable defogger, because again, Claydol is the other rapid spinner, but again, you're not going to bring both. Landorus is totally okay to rely on because, as we've seen, it's a very reliable Pokemon. Defog comes very easy since it's got Intimidate, and since Chris has a double Intimidate core, it's going to be pretty easy to get defogs off. But that puts a lot of weight on Landorus' shoulders, and if Landorus takes too much chip and goes down early or to a bad prediction, it's going to be hard for Chris to deal with rocks after that, or, you know, set up rocks of his own to chip down the opponent. So that brings me to put it at a 6.5, and by no means is that bad. It's just I feel like that's justified at 6.5. He relies on one Pokemon, but that Pokemon is really good at what it does. So next we have Momentum, and this is absolutely Chris's best attribute. The momentum on his team is go, go, go. It never stops. All he does is attack. Oops, sorry. Between Ambipom, Landorus, Incineroar, and Volcanion, he's getting optimal switches constantly with faster or slower U-turns or U-turns on switches. He's getting fake outs. He's getting, you know, double intimidates. He's getting parting shots. It just, nowhere does his momentum really slow down. And if there is somewhere, it's with Umbreon when he's wish passing or heal belling. But again, He's generally going to be wish passing to Landorus and Incineroar, and they're going to be fake out or U-turning right back out. Not to mention they get the Intimidate off first when they come in, and then they get the wish. So it's just it just works so well for him, and there really isn't a point in his momentum that I see as bad. You know, he's got every part of his momentum covered. I mean, Landorus and Incineroar help each other. That's covered by Water Absorb Volcanion. Thunderbolt on Pidgeot's covered by Landorus, and then Fighting is covered by Landorus as well. So, and covered by Reuniclus, and then he's just getting these optimal switches to either, you know, attack or set up or get more chip damage or anything really, or get a defog off or stealth rock. So that leads me to rate Chris's team 40, which is one of my higher ratings. The one thing I want to mention, you know, my rating is not the be all end all. I am not some Pokemon guru. I am not the best draft player. I have played a lot of drafts, so I know kind of what goes on and what happens in drafts. I really just wanted these ratings so somebody could, you know, see a visual representation of their team and, you know, have a cool stat for their team and, you know, look at their team with a different person's eyes, and maybe they see something that I've helped them with and they can, you know, build something better. Or, you know, for opponents versing them, they can make the matchup harder and make the game closer and more interesting to watch. So again, I hope these are enjoyable and fun, and last thing I would want is somebody to get upset or mad. So please let me know if these are a problem. If you don't want your team rated, just let me know, and I have no problem not doing it. But these are just for fun. So again, thank you guys for coming. I hope you guys stick around for my other ones. I promise to get better at these and not so cringy and say 3,000 times and take 20 deep breaths. But yeah, love you guys. Thank you guys. We'll see you on the next one.